Western Allied strategy. I actually wanted to play the Allies this game. I have been toying around with a few ideas. I've only played the Allies maybe 3 times out of 24 games, so I'm not that experienced with them, which we'll probably see later on. And in fact, it probably works to our favor this time because Hilltop Pillbox is not that experienced in Global War 36, at least in version 3, and Panzer King is also, well, though he's studied the game and been around the game and observed and done a bunch of stuff, I don't think he's had too many games under his belt, maybe 3 or 4, 4 or 5, maybe somewhere there. Yeah, so I think we're all fairly equal in this combat, so we're all kind of exploring things together. I wanted to play as the Allies because I wanted to play as France. I wanted to do my best with France, and I also wanted to do a little bit more with Lend-Leasing as America than you normally see. And I wanted to do my best as the KMT, which, as you've seen, I haven't had too much opportunity because the Japanese refused to cooperate. Now, a little bonus question for everybody that may have or may not have already been answered by the time this is published is, can the KMT declare war on Japan? Look at the reference sheets and let me know, but base your evidence on reference sheets or on the rule book. Don't just give me what you think is correct. Awesome. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. A little bit of digging in the rules on my behalf. Okay, so can France survive until the end of the game? Yes, it can. In my previous game against, well, I played one called Tanks on the Tundra against General Hand Grenade, Panzer King, and Rank Carcass. It was one of the first games I've actually met Panzer King. So I tried this Axis strategy where I completely ignored France initially. I actually built a fortified line right on this border, and I went all out into Russia. So in 1940, I think it was, or maybe as early as 1939, I used my attack, regular attack, to take out all of Poland, and then I used my double impulse to get as far as Moscow on the second turn. So first turn I went to war against the Allies, second turn I declared war against the Soviets, and bam, bam, took out Moscow on that turn. Now, second turn of being at war against the Soviets, and third turn being at war against the Allies, I took out Stalingrad, and at that point I controlled everything west of that line. So anything of any value. Maybe I had even Ural over here as well, the Ural Mountains. So the Soviets were left with Novosibirsk, and I believe 2 territories on that side in the mountains. The Japanese grabbed up their coastal areas and as far as they could get in there, and in the end, $5 per turn for the Soviets was not enough for them to survive. Axis went on to win that game quite handily because most of the German Axis victory points are in Russia itself, and so that wasn't an issue. And the Allies, I think I won in the end with a 3 to 2 ratio of victory points over the Allies, and the Soviets barely made it on the chart. So it can be done, but at the expense of going into France. The German forces, though they had the entire income of the Soviets behind them, at that point they could not get into France through Picardy, Alsace-Lorraine, and northern Italy. So we did attempt by going through Belgium, but the French rapidly pushed us off. So we had to fortify this border as well, I believe. The French went on to take out northern Italy, and the British followed up by an attack into Austria, or maybe it was the other way around, before the Germans pushed them off. So we were actually on our back foot on the Western Front. But at that point, we stabilized ourselves behind the fortifications, behind the rivers, and in the mountains, and there was nothing that the Allies could do to us till the end of the game. Now, that's not a true defense of France, though, is it? It's with, by that point, it was with the American forces landing there and troops just flooding in from everywhere. So between the French income, between the British income, as well as the American income, it was just not enough to it was just sufficient enough to hold off the Germans, but not sufficient enough to topple or invade Germany, combined with the Soviet income that they had there, or the used to be Soviet income. Okay, so that's the idea, that's the bigger picture behind all this. Now, I want France to survive, and the goal of their survival is that Germany does not put too much emphasis on land forces. Now, in some ways they've been successful, France has, and Germany has not put much emphasis on land forces. They have put a lot of emphasis on submarines. There's all these ones, I think that's, 2 that he's built over here? There's another one being built up there, and there's been an emphasis on the Spanish Nationalist Civil War, which is why I was okay with supporting the Republicans in boosting up their militia. Another reason I interacted on the major globe is in Ethiopia when France lend-leased to Ethiopia. Now, I wasn't sure about that initially, I wanted to absorb enough Italian troops and also satiate the Italian thirst for blood by them coming into here and reducing the amount of troops. Because I've seen in some other YouTube videos where the Italian player makes a move against southern France. So I wanted to kind of do my best to negate that move. That's the reason why. So I think Panzer King's out to get Britain specifically and thinks that France is going to be a walkover, and it might be. That's why there's all this emphasis here. I think also it could be, they could have some tricks up his sleeve with the Japanese against the British Commonwealth. Or, you know, who knows? It could be even an attempt against, well, Africa. Who knows? That's a bit of a stretch, but we shall see. The defense of France. France is in a tough position, and it always is. Every game it is. Most of the time France falls, as I've said before. In a few games, if Germany ignores France, then France can survive. But if Germany sends any force, it usually is sufficient enough to topple France. The reward is just too high. Germany just gets to keep their entire French treasury if they make France surrender. So it's well worth the risk. You make up for your losses there. Now France has. I did a mathematical calculation before of how many units I needed to go against a typical German attack. What is a typical German attack? Well, I did a bunch of research on Ozark Outpost's website, channel rather, Rank Carcass, and a few other ones I could find about strategy for Germany, and it seems to be the typical run-of-the-mill average is about 6 medium tanks, 6 mechanized, and about 10-ish infantry or that type of unit going into Belgium and into Picardy through that area. So currently we're sitting at turn 4, no, we're doing turn 3, and it looks to be roughly going on with that average. Germany has been spending a lot of money in the Atlantic and in the National Civil War, and so they haven't been putting any money aside yet for anything extra to go into France. So we will likely see tanks and infantry about those numbers. Keep in mind, Germany also has to, at the very least, protect against Poland. Now, Poland can't do too much. It's a lost cause there for the most part. But they can make it difficult for the Germans to attack. Now, the Polish have this fighter, which may be worth getting out of there if Poland survives an additional turn. By putting an aircraft carrier in C-Zone 25, at least a small one in C-Zone 25, we could do that. If we really wanted to, we could probably see that happening. Okay, now, the defense of France itself will be really difficult. Like I said, France has an income of 8. The Germans currently have an income of 23. France, if Germany had annexed Bohemia, we'd be up at 9. And if Japan had been more the classic route, we'd be up at 10. And I think that's about as maximum as they can get if memory serves. So based on an income of about $10 a turn, I had predicted that we could have sufficient forces to hold off the German attack. I'm not so sure anymore. Things look pretty dicey. Now, part of the reason of that is I've really bought my more expensive pieces first before the rest of the game, and that's the reasoning behind that one. Okay, now I've built this fortified line here. I call it Fortress Felix after my son. The reason is twofold. Now, as you know, fortified lines give 2 artillery strikes. So these 2 artillery will be rolling at 5. A normal artillery rolls at 3 for a strike, and it costs $4. This is rolling 2 artillery strikes at 5 and costing $10. So about $5 a piece for an artillery that rolls 5. So that's not too bad, right? You're buying essentially 2 artillery, plus it gives a +2 defensive bonus to all remaining land units, or all defending land units. So we could actually be doing a good thing in building it here. Because what we're trying to do is defend Paris and defend one of the surrounding areas. Alsace-Lorraine seems like the best choice. The Maginot Line is quite important. It does double casualties to, it does 2 hits, double casualties, so any hits caused by the defender will cause double casualties on the attacker. It gives a +3 defense to all land units, and it will also do 2 dice damage, 2 dice rolls first strike at 6. That means from 1 hit, so if 2 dice at 6 is roughly going to be 12, and that means almost a guaranteed hit from this thing. The Maginot Line itself will cause 2 casualties because of the double casualties. So you get my reasoning behind that. I won't go into the math too much, but it's very valuable, the Maginot Line. The territory itself is worth 3. That's worth noting as well. It's also worth noting that anti-aircraft is also a land unit and get a +3 on its first defense or on the first round of combat, which is good because anti-aircraft don't go anything more beyond the first round of combat. So my thinking is this. Oh yeah, let me point out one last thing about fortified lines. You can't blitz out of them. If the Germans come through the Maginot Line, then of course they can't blitz into Paris. If the Germans come from the north to Belgium, to Picardy, and decide they want to try to encircle France instead of taking out Paris, they can't blitz through Alsace-Lorraine. They have to pick up this territory some other way. They can come this way and blitz into Aquitaine, but likely they won't be able to take southern France unless Italy or another nation helps them. So that is also a possibility, which we should look out for. But at that point, we can watch for that one, and that's probably the reason why we made a little bit of effort in Ethiopia to detract from the Italian forces in Europe. Okay, so that's why we built a fortified line here, is to prevent a blitz, plus it's practically 2 artillery in themselves, for the price of them, rolling at 5, regular artillery at 3, these are 2 strikes at 5. Sure, you can't absorb the hits, but the fact they get +2 defense on all land units, including your aircraft, is quite nice. So that's the idea behind that. Now, how will I balance my forces? Well, I'm coming at this with the concept of I won't win. I won't win this fight. So maybe I will, maybe I won't, but I don't think I will. If the Germans come from Picardy and attempt to surround France, they have to go into this area. Now, that will be costly to them, but I want it to be as costly as I could possibly make it, and preferably take off some of their higher units. If the Germans come into Picardy, the second impulse, if they get into here, they can't blitz to here. And if they go straight into Paris, they have to first cross this river, which is a -1 to their first round of attacks. And I could build this place up with militia, and we will have a +1 defense on all regular land units. The aircraft can scramble from this position, or at least the fighter can, to help assist in the defense of Alsace-Lorraine. And if German aircraft come in here, we'll be kind of set in that regards too. So I think we can do a fairly balanced defense and take off a good few German casualties. Overall, we're probably still going to lose, but it'll be a fight worth writing home about. Okay, so that's about all I have to say about this one here. Okay, that's it for the French strategy. Let's take a look at the British strategy. The British strategy is simply holding off, to look weak enough in the Atlantic and to divert ships temporarily to the Mediterranean. Okay, what else can I tell you? So my goal was to look specifically weak here in the Atlantic so that the Germans would put a greater emphasis on it. Of course, that looks painful to me now, right? Where there is a greater presence of German fleet now. But that is for the outcome of French survival. If France survives, for me, then we can clean up the Atlantic later on. But if France doesn't survive, well, then we'll have to deal with the Atlantic issue later on. Now, the Italian fleet's intimidating because it can really project a lot of power into this position through all its aircraft, plus this fleet as well. It's sufficiently dangerous to me, and so I need to watch out for that. Now, what else could I do? The Gibraltar forces over here are in a position where they can reinforce in any direction. So there's 2 infantry and 2 specialist Canadian units. So they're in a position that they can reinforce Egypt, only being 2 spaces away. The other direction is reinforcing southern France, if need be, as a form of assisting in the defense of France. So if we land troops off here, we could retreat either off of Alsace-Lorraine into southern France with British assistance over here. And that's also why these aircraft are here, to rapidly reinforce anywhere that we need to, including Paris itself. I know it'd be small odds with what we have here, but it's better than nothing. I know the strategic bomber is a bad choice in that because they're going to be rolling a single dice at 1 in defense, so that's not the ideal strategy. Now, they could go instead and get northern Italy, which would be an option as a strategic bombing direction, seeing as that's their only factory that they can use. Now, the other way they can reinforce is up north, 1, 2, 3, and drop off in Normandy. That means that the Parisian forces would retreat here to Normandy, and the Alsace-Lorraine forces would retreat to Paris, surrounding Alsace-Lorraine for the survival of 1 additional turn, if need be. Now, Germany could go a different route and get cavalry instead of infantry. It would need to expend more in that case, because it already has plenty of infantry, and it would need to redo its effort, change its effort, and get cavalry instead. And with cavalry, they can be here positioned in Belgium, and on the second impulse, if the tanks take Picardy, they can participate in attack against Paris or Alsace-Lorraine. They'd have to retool their factories and expend some of the income that they're going to be putting aside for tanks for cavalry, though, so that may not work just ideally for them. But it is an option. So there is also going to be an increase in British fighters, and the reason being is twofold. I'll tell you the first obvious one. The fighters will simply reinforce wherever they're needed to. Fighters are the only ones that can scramble to adjacent land territories, which is an addition that they've included in version 3, which I highly approve of. So fighters from, here can come 1, 2, 3, 4 into southern France and scramble 3 units to any adjacent territory, or they could land in Paris and scramble 3 fighters to any adjacent territory. Means to Alsace-Lorraine, it could be 3 French fighters or 1 French fighter and 2 British fighters. And if we drop off troops here, that'd be 3 British fighters can scramble to any of those adjacent areas. That is the goal. And so British fighters from here can go 1, 2, 3, 4, and they still have 1 space additional to get to anywhere they wanted to. So yes, they can come into this territory if they need to. The second reason for aircraft would be an anti-submarine role. But seeing as this video has gone on plenty long enough, I'll save that for a future strategy video where we can address these issues. Thank you all for watching, and stay tuned. Cheers!